Hey guys, Samuel Allred here. Welcome back to the Persistence Outdoors podcast. We are getting further into the hunting season, and if you're a rifle hunter and you haven't already, now is a good time to sight in your rifle. Even experienced hunters check the zero on their rifle at the beginning of the season, after traveling, before important hunts. So you need to understand the process, and that is what we're going to focus on today. I'm specifically talking about sighting in rifles with a scope, but the process is pretty much the same no matter what sighting system or optic you're using. The way you adjust your sights may vary, but overall the process is the same. So once you have a good understanding of what you're trying to do, you'll be good to go with whatever sighting system you end up using. The sighting process is pretty universal, but if you're newer to shooting rifles or you just haven't shot big game cartridges before, there are a lot of variables that come into play when you're trying to get a good zero. So I'm going to give you my perspective, not only on how to do it, but also on some best practices that will help you sight in efficiently and effectively. Before we get into it, if you enjoy this podcast, please take a moment to follow it on whatever platform you listen on, leave a 5-star review, and especially share an episode with a friend. You might have friends who are interested in hunting, but they haven't gotten around to it, or they don't know where to start. This is the perfect podcast for them. And I truly believe that if you're a competent individual, you can get into hunting on your own. You know, as a side note, there's a lot of hunters out there who would prefer that nobody else gets into hunting because new hunters means more competition in the woods. And I get it. It's always disappointing to be out hunting and have someone else walk into your spot, even if it's on public land. And maybe you put in a lot of time and effort to get to know that area or find those animals. And it sucks when other people seemingly intrude on that. But if you look at the history of hunting, not just in the US, but around the world, hunting opportunities, once they go away, are usually gone for good. It was happening all the way back with Robin Hood and the King's deer, right? At some point, hunting becomes reserved for only people who can afford land or afford to buy into a club or something like that. So if you want to hunt in the future, especially on public land, it's actually important that other people around you are invested in hunting as well. And one of the best ways to help someone develop a positive view of hunting is to bring them hunting so they can discover what it's all about. And whether they become a hunter or not, at least they can make an informed decision about it. And hopefully they will have a positive outlook on hunting. And that will allow everybody who wants to hunt to be able to hunt in the future. All that to say, if we don't invite other people into the hunting lifestyle, it will die out. It simply will not exist in the future, or at least it won't exist as we know it. And that would be a tragedy. So share an episode with a friend, bring people into the hunting lifestyle, and I will get off my soapbox and we can get into our topic for today. All right, so to sight in your rifle properly, you actually have to start before going to the range and you have to mount your scope. And you can get really in-depth with how to mount a scope. I'm going to give you the simple version, and then if you want to go back and level it or do anything special, you can. But when you buy a rifle, you are going to have the rifle and the scope, and they're going to be separate. And you need a way to attach the scope to the rifle. And so you are going to need scope rings. Scope rings will attach either to the rifle or to a piece of rail on the rifle. A popular type of rail is a Picatinny rail, and the scope rings will connect your scope to your rifle. And it's up to you whether you use a piece of rail or not. The rail will give you a little bit of customizability. You could put bigger or smaller scopes on there, or you can just directly attach your scope to your rifle using scope rings that screw into the top of your receiver. So either way, whatever you want to do works. When you are choosing scope rings and possibly a rail, though, you want to make sure that the rings are high enough so that your scope will fit without the objective lens touching the barrel of your gun. So the objective lens is the wide diameter lens that is further away from you when you're looking through the scope the right way. And when you mount it to your rifle, you need to make sure that there's a little daylight in between the edge of that lens and the rifle barrel. It really doesn't have to be a lot of room. It just needs to be enough that when the shot goes off, the barrel doesn't touch the objective lens. So it can be very close, but just make sure there's some space. You'll also want to think about what's comfortable to look through. The height of the scope rings is somewhat subjective. Obviously, you don't want them too high so that when you shoulder the rifle, you can't see through the scope. That'd be ridiculously high. You also don't want them so low that you have to crane your neck over really hard to even look through your scope. So you want somewhere in the middle. You may also want to consider your stock and your cheek weld. But when you're starting out, I think just try to figure out a comfortable height where the objective lens isn't touching the barrel and you can see through the scope without really contorting yourself into an uncomfortable position. If you really have no idea where to start when it comes to scope ring height, oftentimes when you are buying scope rings online, they will have some sort of guide to help you either calculate or determine what height of scope rings you need for your scope and for your rifle. So likely you will be able to figure out what you need just based on the type of scope. And then if you have the opportunity to change it around for comfort, that's great as well. Okay, so the next very important aspect of mounting a scope is the eye relief. And this is the distance from your eye to the ocular lens, which is the lens closest to you, the eyepiece, right? You want to be far enough away from your scope that when you shoot the rifle, it doesn't recoil and hit your face. And you also want to be close enough that you get a clear picture. So there's often sort of a narrow window where you can see through your scope and see a full field of view. There's a minimal black ring that you see in there, like a donut obscuring your view. And also not too close that you're going to scope yourself when you fire. So you're going to have to play around with this. You're going to have to mount your scope rings and then drop your scope into them. And then you just shoulder your rifle. I would do the standing, shoulder your rifle, and then move the scope closer or further away, just depending on what you can see. And when you're doing this, make sure to crank your scope up to the highest magnification because your eye relief will be shortest at that magnification. And if you can find that perfect eye relief at that magnification, it will work at all the other magnifications. So again, as far away as you can keep it while still being able to see a full field of view in your scope, and you're going to be right on. What I find helpful is to take a pencil and mark my scope against the scope rings. So once I figure out the right eye relief, I have a little marker on the scope. It's not going to damage it. And I know the correct eye relief when I go to the next step. The next step is going to be to level the scope. And you're trying to level it compared to the rifle. If you don't have a way to level, it's going to be imperfect. And that's okay, especially if you're using a duplex reticle. That center point is still going to be a useful aiming point, even if your duplex is a little crooked. So I would shoulder the rifle and then eyeball it. Try to look at something far away through the scope and try to make it what seems vertical to you while you've got that rifle shouldered. Now, if you have some sort of BDC reticle or graduated reticle and you want to use those hash marks, especially at distance, it is going to be more important that your rifle scope is leveled. And so to do that, you would get a bubble level kit, put your gun in a gun vise, maybe use a plumb bob, something like that, to make sure that your rifle and your scope are perfectly level with each other. And then out in the field, you would also want to make sure that your scope is level when you're shooting. But a lot of hunters aren't going to do that. And at traditional hunting distances, you're probably going to be okay, even if your scope is just a tiny bit off. I say that because the first time I looked through a rifle scope, I could tell it was off and it bothered me a lot. And I wondered if it was going to affect my shooting. Now, I haven't used a bubble level kit on my rifle that I use, but I have eyeballed it and it seems pretty level. And when I go to the range, I can hit stuff with it. So that's where I'm at. In the future, I'll probably get into leveling it and shooting at further distances, but it's not too important right now. Now, once you've got the scope level, you are going to tighten down the scope rings. And you should use a torque wrench for this if you have one. If you're like me, you don't have a torque wrench and you don't want to spend $30 or $60 to get one. So you want to tighten your scope rings firm, but not overpowering to the point where you're going to actually crunch the scope tube. And when you're tightening them, tighten in a crisscross pattern, just like tightening the lug nuts on a wheel. Tighten in a crisscross pattern so it's even, and keep checking to make sure that your scope stays level as you tighten it down. If you have a torque wrench or you want to buy one, then you can look at the torque specifications on the scope rings, and that will help you be very precise and accurate and not damage any of your equipment. All right, so you've mounted your scope and you are literally set up for success. My first tip for sighting in your rifle is to go with a buddy. Going to the rifle range with a buddy just makes everything feel a little bit easier. You can spot while they're shooting and they can spot while you're shooting. If you both have rifles to sight in, you can shoot and let the other person's rifle cool and alternate that way. You have another eye on things just to help you figure out what the variables are. So maybe you're shooting and you're flinching and your buddy can look at you and say, hey, you're flinching. That's why your group isn't great. It's not the gun. And I just find it more enjoyable to go to the rifle range with a buddy. I've sighted in rifles plenty of times by myself, and it's fine. You can definitely do it, but you can really get sort of tunnel vision and get in the zone, and it can feel kind of stressful. And I just find that having a friend there to help out and talk with makes it so much easier. So especially if you're starting out, bring a buddy. You guys can learn together, and it's going to make the whole process just a little bit easier. Your first step, if you can, is to bore sight the rifle. So this works on bolt action rifles. You just remove the bolt and then you can look through the barrel. And what you're going to do is you're going to rest the rifle on a bench, maybe on a shooting bag or on a block or something. And you are going to aim it at your target, and preferably a target that's pretty close. And you are going to look down the barrel of the gun and position the rifle so that you can see through the barrel of the gun to the target, to the bullseye of your target. Then you're going to keep the gun in that same position and adjust your scope so that the crosshairs are in the center of the bullseye of that target. And this is going to give you a very rough zero to start out with. And hopefully, once you take your first shot, you are going to hit near or on your target. So bore sighting is very useful, especially if you've just mounted a scope for the first time. Once you've bore sighted your rifle, go ahead and take a shot at a very close range. So maybe 25 yards or 50 yards. And the purpose of this shot is to get on paper. Once you're on paper, you will know where you're hitting in relation to your target, and then you can adjust your sights accordingly, right? So at 50 yards or at 25 yards, say you take your first shot and you are a foot low. Well, at least you know where the point of impact was. If you were at 100 yards or 200 yards and you took that shot, the bullet isn't even going to impact on the target. And you're going to have to figure out if you were low, if you were high. You're probably going to have to take another shot and start adjusting. And it's just going to be a lot harder. You're going to shoot more. You're going to waste money by sending ammo down range. And it's not worth it. Just take your first shot at a closer distance. Now, if you've hunted with your rifle last season and you had it zeroed last season, by all means, take a shot at 100 yards. You'll likely still be on the target. But if you're starting from a bore-sighted rifle, take that first shot at a close range. Next, you'll want to choose your zero distance. For hunting purposes, most people zero their rifle at 100 yards or 200 yards. If you're a Western big game hunter, I'm just going to say zero your rifle at 200 yards. If you're maybe hunting in the South or the eastern side of the US and you're not going to have a lot of shot opportunities at 200 yards or further, zero it at 100. It's kind of personal preference. You can also zero your rifle at different distances, and it doesn't have to be 100 or 200 yards, but a standard for Western big game hunters is 200 yards. With most big game hunting cartridges, they have a flat enough trajectory that if you zero the rifle at about 200 yards, you can pretty much hold dead on where you want to hit the animal, and you will hit your animal within a few inches of where you aim, out and a little bit past 200 yards. So I have a 30-06, and I know that when I'm zeroed at 200 yards, the bullet will be about 2 inches high at 100 yards and about 3 inches low at 225 yards. So I'm pretty comfortable shooting out to 225 yards, just aiming at the animal where I want to hit it. And even if it impacts 3 inches high or 3 inches low, I'm likely still going to land in the vital zone of the animal and kill that animal successfully. So that's kind of the beauty of a 200-yard zero. If you zeroed at 100 yards and then you wanted to make a shot out at 225 yards, likely you are going to have to hold higher to compensate for that bullet drop. Once you've chosen a zero distance, you're going to prepare to shoot some groups. And what you want to do is get a solid rest. When you're sighting in a rifle, you want to remove as much human error as possible. And so you want the gun to be still and steady and repeatable when you're shooting it. So when I'm sighting in my rifle, sometimes I bring a bag of rice and I set the fore end of the rifle on that bag of rice. And then I bring some sort of other bag or a coat or something to stuff under the back end of the stock. And that way the rifle has 2 points of contact and I can just set it there and actually point it at the target and it's not moving. And so it helps to get super steady. And that way I know that when I get a point of impact, when I shoot the rifle and the bullet lands on my target, I know that that was because of the rifle. And if it lands differently than where I was aiming, I know it was the rifle and not me manipulating the gun improperly. You'll still introduce human variability by your trigger pull and the way you have the rifle mounted to your shoulder and all of that. But do yourself a favor and start by getting a solid rest. Now, you don't want to put your gun in a vise or a lead sled that's too heavy for it. You can actually break the stock of your rifle when it recoils, but there's all sorts of things that you can rest your gun on and get it really nice and steady. Once you're super steady and you feel like if the gun went off just by itself, you would hit the target, then you're ready to shoot a group. And so a group is just a number of shots fired at the same point of aim. So you are going to aim for the dead center of your target, and then you are going to shoot, let's say, a group of 5 shots. And it's important that as you shoot this group, you aim at the same place each time. If you see that your bullet landed to the left, don't adjust your point of aim. Just keep aiming where you aimed the first time and finish your group, okay? When you shoot a group, the more shots you have in a group, the more data you have. So I would recommend to shoot at least 5 shots in your group, especially if you're new and maybe you're not a super great shooter yet. Shoot 5 shots and you are going to have an idea of where your rifle is shooting in relation to where you're aiming. So once you have that group of 5 shots, you could do 10 if you wanted, but once you've got that group of 5 shots, you're going to look at your target and find the center of that group. And if there's obviously an outlier, like you pulled a shot, you can leave that out of your group. But once you find the center of that group, you can then use that as a point to help you adjust your scope. So let's say that you look at your group and you are shooting 2 inches high and 3 inches to the left. Well, now you can look at the elevation and windage adjustments on your scope, and you can adjust accordingly. So the elevation turret is usually on top of your scope, and it is going to determine up or down movement. And the windage turret is going to be on the side of the scope, and that is going to determine left or right movement. You're going to have to look at the increments on your scope. Likely it will say something like 1 click equals 1/4 MOA. MOA is a measurement of angle, and at 100 yards, 1 MOA, the span of 1 MOA equals about 1 inch. It's not exactly 1 inch, but for hunting purposes, 1 inch is close enough. So if you are zeroing your rifle at 100 yards and you need to move it 1 inch to the right, let's say, you would go to your windage turret, you would take a look at which direction to turn it so that your point of impact moves to the right. And if it's 1/4 click equals 1 MOA, you can turn it 4 clicks and your point of impact will move 1 inch to the right. Okay. Now, the other common increment is MRAD or mil radian. It's the same thing. 1 mil radian, or mil for short, 1 mil equals approximately 3.6 inches at 100 yards. Again, it's a measurement of angle, just like a degree is a measurement of angle. So 1 mil radian is a measurement of angle. The span of that at 100 yards equals about 3.6 inches. So once you start to understand that, you can adjust your scope accordingly. You're going to have to do a little bit of math, and the more you work with it, the easier it's going to get. One thing that you should understand about MOA is that it's going to double at 200 yards. So if the span of 1 MOA at 100 yards is about 1 inch, at 200 yards, it's going to be about 2 inches. And at 300 yards, it's going to be about 3 inches. So if you are adjusting your rifle scope and your rifle scope says each click of adjustment equals 1/4 MOA, well, at 200 yards, that's going to be 1/4 of 2 inches. And at 300 yards, that's going to be 1/4 of 3 inches. So it will be tricky to wrap your mind around at first, but once you start using it, it's a really great system, and you'll easily be able to adjust your rifle scope how you need it. One thing that's really helpful during this process is to use a target that has an inch grid. And this is because you will shoot, you will see where your group lands, and it's helpful to have that inch grid so you know exactly in inches without having to measure with a ruler or something like that, exactly how far you need to adjust your rifle scope. If you don't have that inch grid, you may go out and start to estimate, and then you may over or underestimate and have to make multiple adjustments and shoot multiple groups. And also, if you have binoculars or a spotting scope, you can look through those and see your target from a distance away and know exactly how many inches you have to adjust without going all the way out to your target and looking at it. So an inch grid when you are sighting in your rifle is really helpful. Another thing you want to be aware of when you're shooting your groups is how warm your rifle barrel is getting. With a lot of hunting rifles, they have pretty narrow contour barrels, and it makes them lighter and more pleasant to carry in the field. But it also means that the barrel will heat up faster. And if your barrel heats up too much, it can actually start shooting inconsistently. So if you are shooting and you start to notice that your gun is throwing shots and you don't really know why, you might just need to take a break and let that barrel cool and then come back to it in 5 or 10 minutes. All right, so a little bit of a detour there, but once you've shot your group, you have found the center of that group, you've determined where it is in relation to your point of aim, then you are going to adjust your scope appropriately, and then you have to shoot another group to confirm. So once again, get your rifle super steady, and then shoot another 5 shots and see where that group lands. And hopefully now you're hitting the bullseye of your target right where you are aiming. If you're not though, you'll just repeat the process again. You will find the center of the group you just shot, adjust your rifle scope, and then shoot another group to confirm. And you basically can do this indefinitely until you're happy with your results. I will tell you that when I was first starting to really get proficient with a hunting rifle, my initial results were not that great. I was shooting a 30-30 with iron sights at 100 yards, and I was shooting maybe, I think they were 180 grain bullets. So they didn't have that great of a trajectory, and the rifle was old. I wasn't a great shooter. And so my initial groups were coming out to be like 8-inch groups at 100 yards. And I wasn't super happy with that because I just, in my mind, imagined that I was going to shoot the rifle and I would just have incredible precision. It would be like a laser, right? And I had shot 22s in the past at much shorter distances, and they're so easy to shoot and be precise with. And so I was kind of expecting that sort of thing with this rifle. But this rifle recoils, and it was old, and I was probably inconsistent when I was shooting with my rest, and maybe I was touching the barrel to things when I was shooting, which can throw off the shot. And so I was getting these big groups, and it was a little bit frustrating, and it took me a while to actually become a better shooter and tighten those groups up. But I just say that because it's kind of to be expected. Hopefully you'll be a better shooter right off the bat than I was, or maybe you'll have better equipment. But don't go out and just expect to be shooting keyholes. Likely you're going to have a group that's around, 4 inches at 100 yards or 3 inches at 100 yards. And that's not a bad thing. That's just where you're at as a shooter. And the more you practice, the more you'll improve. Now, that's actually a good segue because let's say you shoot a group at 200 yards and it's a good group. It's like 3 inches at 200 yards. And you think, okay, I'm ready to go hunting and I'm accurate out to 200 yards. Well, not so fast. When you're hunting, you are going to have a lot of different conditions than when you're sighting in your rifle. So when you're sighting in your rifle, you've got that perfect, solid, steady rest. But when you're hunting, it's unlikely that you're going to have that sort of rest. And when you're sighting in your rifle, you have all the time in the world to take each shot. But when you're hunting, maybe you only have 10 seconds to make that shot or the animal disappears. So in hunting scenarios, you're likely not going to shoot as accurately as you do when you're sighting in your rifle. So you actually need to go out and practice separate from sighting in your rifle. You need to practice shooting from standing up or shooting off of your backpack or shooting using a tree as a rest or to stabilize your rifle. And then you'll start to get a better understanding of what your actual effective range is. So if you're shooting good groups at 200 yards, I'm not saying that you can't hunt out to 200 yards. Just be aware that your field accuracy is going to be different than your accuracy shooting from a bench in a controlled environment. All right, guys. Well, that's about it for today. This is pretty essential stuff, but I hope it was helpful to hear how I do it, and maybe you can adapt my process and make it work for you. If you have any questions, if anything's unclear, or if there's anything you want to know about that I didn't cover, shoot me an email at persistenceoutdoors2022@gmail.com. There's no A's in persistence, as I figured out the hard way when choosing a website domain back in the day. But yeah, shoot me an email or send me a message on Instagram. You can just search Persistence Outdoors and it should come up. Have a great week, everybody. Happy shooting, and I will catch you on the next one.